Welcome back to the J-pole build. This is part 2. Now, first up, apologies to those of you, quite a few people commented on part 1 of where's part 2. And one thing I'm not going to do ever again for YouTube is to put part 1 on a video without having part 2 already up and running. So yeah, it's probably been a couple of years and I've only just got around to sort of reviewing it really and trying to refine the footage, all the usual. But anyway, this is part 2 and I hope you find it interesting, and I'd like you, if you feel so inclined, to comment on the whys and wherefores, where I've gone wrong or where I've gone right, and your own experiences. If you've seen part 1 a couple of years have gone by and you've made your own, and you know, what was your results? But yeah, so all I can say is just watch it. Hopefully it's not too boring, but a little bit more informative, and it's just an example of I guess another ham making another J-pole, and that little journey of getting it right or wrong, as the case may be. Yeah, so it's very simple, practical build, as you saw in the first part, hopefully, but I had quite a bit of issue trying to get the whole thing tuned up, and there's probably a number of reasons for that, none of which I actually properly nailed or discovered, I would say, but a catalogue of running errors on something so simple. But I got it to work, and I made a couple of QSOs, and yeah, fair enough, watch the video. But yet again, apologies to quite a lot of people who asked where part 2 is. This is part 2. I hope it's as interesting as you'd hope it would be. So I've got my J-pole then set up here, just on a short little stubby mast, just in the workshop, and going to try and tune it. So I need to check, see if it's resonant on the frequency that I want it on, and whether or not my feed point here is at the correct distance to give me a sort of 50 ohm match. And I've just got these couple little wires here connected up to my nano VNA, and then we can sweep over the frequency and see where we're at. Ah, that's interesting. Look, if I come near it, it's affecting it. If I come away, it's a bit further again. So let's see where that is. Let's let that settle down. So at the top there, where at the bottom of the SWR curve, if I take my finger away, it's 1.2 to 1, and that is on 127.5 megahertz, and we've got about 56 ohms at the feed point there. So that's low, isn't it? So that means we're probably too long. Not by much, but we're too long. So we need to trim the length of the overall length of the antenna to try and bring that SWR curve up to closer, or bang on the frequency that we want. Not far off by the looks of it with the feed point. That says 56 ohms there. So I won't adjust that for now. Feed point is just a case of going up or down. Okay, well that's an initial scan, isn't it? Promising. At least we're not too short. We'd have to be adding stuff on, we can cut stuff off. Right, get this back onto the bench. We'll trim it and bring it back, test again. So in the making video, I used this calculation from an online calculator. The frequency I used was 145.0. Well, that's half a megahertz lower than the calling frequency. Yeah. So that should be 145.5. So I just redid the calculation. So instead of 149 centimeters overall, it's 148.5. So half centimeter, 5 millimeters shorter. And the matching section, we got 49.7, should be 49.5. So 2 mil. Well, that's a gnat, isn't it? So let's see what we got. So these are overall dimensions on this particular J-pole. So from the end here, from the base, all the way along, overall, we have got 149. So that's bang on there, isn't it? So we need to take 5mm off. And what about the stub section? 149.7 should be one, yeah, well, so my original dimensions were absolutely bang on. And we're nowhere near that resonant frequency, are we? Anyhow, let's trim it. We know we've got to come shorter, and let's see what happens. Right, so trimmed the stub there, trimmed overall. So let's put it back on the analyzer. Yep, it's moved, that's 131.5. So we moved up 10 megahertz by taking 5mm off. Oh well, better do that again. That's also saying 60 ohms. So we've gone up a little bit, which that stands to reason, doesn't it? If we shorten the overall length, then we obviously need to reduce our feed point a little bit as well. If we don't, then essentially it's like moving the feed point up a bit, isn't it? So that's okay. We know that we've got to come down on our feed point. 132.5 megahertz, that's 1 to 1.5 SWR or thereabouts. I want to get it closer to my frequency I want first before I can zoom in. So yep, another round of trimming the overall length. Right, so I wasn't getting anywhere regarding tuning, so I've just double checked this calculation, and I've double checked the drawing that was online as well. So having trimmed the tubes, cut them back, I've decided to extend them again and to get back to these dimensions to see if that made any difference. Also, I've put the test rig outside, so it's clear from any interference inside the shed. I've also taken off the RF choke at the bottom there as well, so it's just straight coax. So having done all that, we're back where we were basically. I don't know if you can see the cursor there, that's at 144 megahertz. We've got a 3.85 to 1 SWR, 13 ohm impedance. But as you can see, the graph, or the curve if you like, SWR, is still continuing down. So we're sort of resonant down here somewhere. The sort of lowest we got there at this scale is about there somewhere, 1.17, 1.16. That's at 444 megahertz. Well, that's sort of 77's territory, isn't it? We're in a completely different band. I was hoping for 2 meters. We're up in 77's. So I'm going to have to revise this calculations and see what I'm doing either incorrectly or there's a mistake somewhere that I've followed and I am repeating. But we're certainly not getting any resonance in the sort of ballpark 2 meter band that I was hoping for. So more work. Doing a bit of testing, and the bit of coax I was used has got a fault, which is classic really. So if I just try the continuity here on this end, obviously the table look isn't connected. Put that on there. Look, there's continuity between the shield and the inner. And this is the other end here, and there's the shield, there's the inner. So somewhere in this coil there's a short, so that's no good. And of course I've been trying to tune the aerial with that, not really understanding what my nano VNA has been telling me. So I've got a short sort of patch lead here now. I'll use a different bit of coax on the end of here, and we'll have another go. But of course another thing is I've found that it's very sensitive to my body, you know, my capacitance if you like. So with all the J poles that you read about, tuning them, really you need to tune them where they're actually going to be hoisted if you like, where you're actually going to erect them on your mast. So I haven't really got a permanent place for this at the moment, but I have got a 6 meter pole that I can put up. So this is going to be in free space above the roof of the workshop here. And we can try that up and down a couple of times to see if we can get this actually tuned to resonate within the 2 meter band. So yeah, test and test and test again, isn't it really? So we'll see. We'll have another go. So there's the J pole. I've got a couple of BNC connectors here that I've just taped on. It's a lovely wet summer's day here, so I'm just trying to keep some of the moisture off of this. And then I've got just under 20 meters of coax. Now this is not the right sort of coax, and I've obviously got an air choke here from a previous project. I'm not going to undo all that. So, but a J-pole would need an RF choke, but that's probably not an appropriate one. It's probably the wrong size, but I haven't worked that out. But it'd be good enough for me just to try and get this tuned up with the Nano VNA. One thing I have started to do since mucking about with this is I've started to use it, rightly or wrongly, with this the lead, one of the leads that comes with it, so that I'm screwing into this end all the time rather than the socket on the actual body of the thing itself. So long as you calibrate it to here, I think that's good enough, certainly good enough for me, for the odd aerials that I'm using this for. So this is my coax, that's up the top of the 6 metre mast that you've just seen, into this fitting here, and as you can see I'm not actually affecting if I touch that, output there. So I've got SWR, Smith chart and return loss, and that's currently on 350 megahertz to 500 megahertz. So while we're here, just out of interest, 70 centimeters is 433. So if I can bring this over to 433 at the top, I'm looking at my frequency up here, 434. Okay, we've got 1 to 1.13 SWR, we've got 45 ohms impedance, and we got minus 27 dB. I would say that's tuned for the 77 metre band. Right, let's open the frequency a bit more and see where we're meant to be. It's looking like it's all coming up slightly, but we'll see. There's a dip there, isn't there? And right, so we can just bring this along. Frequency's coming down. So just out of interest, because we've got a Smith chart as well, you can see our impedance here. It's a little circle. We're spanning from 500 megahertz down to 120 megahertz, and we've got impedance there. So when it's one side, there's 50, there's 35, there's 63, 68, 40, 34. So we're probably, you know, a rough estimate, we're about 15 ohms either side of 50. Okay, just out of reference. So we're coming down in frequency. All the while our SWR is rising slightly. Rising slightly. There's 154, and then there's the dip on the far left of the screen. We're in the bottom of the dip, 142.8. It's good to see that there's a dip there, so we've obviously got some sort of resonance going on. So we're in the band, just. So we're at 120, let's go to say 180, let's change it so we've got a bigger focused on where we want to be. So we're much more focused in now, so that's 142.8, 145,200 there, 1 to 1.4 SWR, 50 ohm and minus 15 dB. So according to that little dip, we want to come up in frequency, which means in theory our antenna needs to be a bit shorter. Also, looking at that 60 ohm, ideally we want to get it down to about 50 ohm, don't we? So we could reduce the height, well, we could shorten the feed point, bring it down. I think it's about 50 millimeters at the moment. We could bring it down to say to 45, see if that makes a difference. See if we get a difference, whether that makes a difference to tuning as well, before we actually start shortening any of the tubes. Okay, here we are again. I brought it in, slid the two Jubilee clips down, two hose clips down, and I noticed I was getting the wrong effect that I thought I'd have. Impedance went up to about 80 ohms. So what I've done, I've gone the other way. I've gone higher up the two tubes now. I've also reduced the width of the frequency I'm scanning, so I'm going from 144 megahertz to 146 megahertz. So I've got 1 to 1.2 SWR, minus 20 dB return, and I've got 59 ohms impedance, and that's on 145/500, which is the calling frequency on 2 meters in the UK. If I go higher up, you can see at the top these are gradually coming down. 146 there, 1-to-1 SWR, and 54. That would suggest that you'd want to go longer, isn't it? So there's a trade-off there, in as much as you move the feed point, and also you can adjust the two legs of the J-pole, which you do. And how you go about that is one of those, isn't it? Do you trim a little bit off, or do you adjust your feed point? Probably got to do both. Now obviously there's a relationship between the long side and the short side of your J-pole. You can't just trim one, perhaps. Maybe you can. I'm going to try that now. I'm going to try just trimming a little bit off the stub, the shorted stub side, see what that does. Because if I bring the feed point down, my impedance goes up, and it looks like the resonant frequency also goes up as well. On the previous scan, it looked like I was too long overall. So what I want to do then is I want to bring my feed point down a little bit, and I also want to shorten the overall length of everything. So that's going to be my next job. I'd like to get this dip that we're seeing here from left to right, I'd like to get that more towards the middle of the band. Right, let's go and have another play. So I've just trimmed off about 3-4 mil, just over 1/8 of an inch probably, off the stub side. Not a lot has changed really, but you can barely see perhaps that the sort of bottom of the curve, these are basically straight lines really, but the bottom of the curve is now lower down in frequency. Here's my 145/500, where I kind of want it properly resonant, but you could argue it is. But I've got 65 ohms there of impedance. So if I move these traces to the left, the impedance is coming down, around about sort of 50 ohms is round about there somewhere, 14450. So yeah, I want to be at 145. So what's that, 1 megahertz lower. And nothing in it in terms of SWR, and nothing really in it in terms of return loss. That's minus 16 there, and 1.13 SWR. If I go back up, there's there it is, there's 500 there. All that's basically changed is my impedance has come up to 65 ohms. So now then, let's go and adjust my feed point. Right, so this thing is driving me crazy, and I think just reading on the internet they're really reasonably notorious for tuning. So I've been revisiting my initial calculations, looked online again at other calculations, and they do vary, not substantially, but they do vary. Another thing to note is that some of them are measured, if I can get this to stay around here, some of them are measured from the bottom of your pipe overall, and some of the dimensions start at the top of the pipe overall. Now, whether that's going to make a huge difference, I wouldn't like to say. Obviously, the thicker the pipe, all those sorts of subtle differences. Now, in theory, this feed point should be 50 mil, or nearly 2 inches from the bottom here, which is way down here. So I've been trying up and down to no real avail. I've tried trimming the ends subtly and adjusting, and haven't been getting anything anywhere near a resonant frequency, or more importantly, getting a good impedance match. It's been way too high, 60-70 ohms on my Nano here. So yeah, just gone for a cup of tea. I thought, right, we'll make it all long again and we'll have another go. So I've got my feed point up here, which is about 4 inches from the bottom, and I've just found a bit of pipe, stuffed it on the end because I've run out of fittings, and this is all a bit Heath Robinson. Stuffed it on there, and look, I've got 1 to 1.0 SWR. I've got 51 ohms, and I've got minus 36 dB. That is on 145/500, and that is exactly what I want. Isn't that amazing? So I'm assuming from those numbers I've got a good tune. Now, if you get anywhere near this, it changes. So you don't know where you are trying to tune these things if you're not careful. Now, I don't know whether that's a good sign or not, that they're so susceptible to, is that capacitance, is it? I think my body is obviously altering the field there. So if I stand away as best I can, absolutely cock on, I would say, for tune. So yeah, I'm just going to leave everything as is. I'm going to solder that bit of copper on there and leave it and see what happens. But for me, it's not so much the SWR. I mean, so long as you're below 2, I think you're safe. But it's the impedance matches that I'm wanting, near 50 ohms. And with this little setup right here, right now, that's what I've got. And with the Smith chart there, you can see in the middle, the impedance is, very, very well centered. And that is just literally a random bit of pipe. I thought, I'll just slit that, stuff it over, and then I can start cutting this back again to the correct length. I don't even know what length that is, but it's definitely way longer than it should be. But I've got a match. Now, that is way longer than it should be, and in theory, these are further up than they should be. So maybe it's just a case of, as long as you've got the relationship between your long and your short, maybe this height here, although it is adjustable, maybe that, I don't know. But according to that, and my nano is calibrated, so I'm going to solder that on there and see what happens. Right, soldered on there now. We'll see. And we've still got our 50 ohm match. Right, I'm going to put it up outside. Right, there we go again. Bit windy, blowing this fiberglass tube about. There's my other 2 metre 70 SEMS with a homebrew ground plane wafting around. It's all a bit too windy today really for this mucking about, but anyway. So, J-pole, come down and OVNA, and as it was just now. So, our SWR 1 to 1.03, well that's absolutely bang on. We've got 49.1 ohms, I'm really happy with that, minus 34 dB, and that is on 145 500, which as I said before is the calling channel on FM on 2 meters in the UK. So I don't know if that's a happy coincidence. I'm going to have to measure it in a minute when I bring it down. Out of interest, what I'll do, I'll put the other aerial on to see what I'm getting on 2 meters with that little mobile aerial. So I've just plugged the current aerial in, and on the same frequency I've got 1 to 1.13 SWR. I've got 43 ohms and minus 23 dB, just as reference. And it's slightly opposite in as much as all those numbers start to improve if I go down the frequency. So if I go right at the very, very bottom of the frequency of the band here, 144, we've got 51 ohms, 1 to 1 and minus 30 dB. So this little aerial is a mobile mag mount aerial that I had on the pickup, and it's a dual band. It's 2 meters and 70 SEMS, and it is actually slightly a little bit too long, but I'm not going to mess with it because you've got the 2 different elements. You've got the lower and the upper, and obviously one affects the other, and to mess with that, I'm just happy enough as it is. So I kind of know what performance I'm getting locally with that. It's about a metre higher or so than the J-pole is at the moment, but I do know with this wind I do get like a phase shift with the local repeater 30 plus miles away, so yeah, like a multipath error, so in and out, but should be okay on 2 meters. That's on 70 SEMS the repeater, so we'll see. So what I'll do is I'll see if I can get somebody on the radio and see if they're game for me to try the 2 aerials. Okay, just messaged a friend who's about 16 miles away over the other side of the hill from me, and we'll see if we can have a QSO today.
And yeah, so are you playing with your J-pole. Is that what you're up to today? Testing out the new location of the Yeti, which unfortunately I'm on the wrong side of a little spinney of half a dozen little birch trees.
A good 5. Signal about 5 or 6. A little bit down on as well. So back to you, and while you're on your over, I'll just swap out the aerials. So back to you, Kevin.
Break. Good afternoon, John. End stop in the meter, literally. So Colin's about an S1 with me, but readable, the receiver.
So Kevin's signal isn't fluctuating there now.
Like I guess it's a little bit windy.
It's gone down a little bit.
I guess because it's been fairly strong.
I'm getting a 4.
W0SXS. I'll pass it round to Colin for hello with a signal report. I'm sure you'll be able to hear it.
Yes, so I'm now on the J-pole, Kevin, so hopefully you're receiving. Good afternoon to yourself, John. It's a bit lower than the other aerial, and I'm running 10 watts. Kevin's signal to me seemed to be an S point lower. You're a steady 5 instead of a sort of 5-6, but...
Yeah, good afternoon, Colin. Your signal is a very steady 5x6.
And yes, well, thanks for the signal report, John. And not often I get a plus 40. Colin, I would say that you're a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
It doesn't show on the meter, but I can hear a little background QRN. Now, about 100 metres from here, there's an electric fence. And on very, very marginal signals, I can just hear that click. So about once every second, I get a little click. It doesn't actually affect the readability of your audio, but that's how I can tell that when you're over with the second antenna, it was more to influence of that. So that's about the best I can sort of describe that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, your signal is down probably an S point, so maybe this J-pole doesn't have as much gain as the other little aerial, which is interesting.
So your homemade J-pole isn't doing as well as another antenna. That's the issue. And well, you've got to try it out, even though it's tuned properly. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to do as well as another one. And well, one S point in one direction, that's all you've really sort of ascertained. So you might try it out in different directions, and with weaker signals, that's probably a good thing to try comparing.
To be honest with you, just with this quick test, I'm inclined just to leave it as it is and put it down to experience and never make one ever again. Yeah. So let's change that over while he's talking.
I've got to get myself moving with my better now. I can come over with my van, and you can run your analyzer on my antennas.
Regards Colin's feed point on the matching stub at the bottom of the J-pole, I shouldn't worry about it. If you find 50 ohm plus or minus 0, then effectively you've got a 50 ohm resonance at that particular point.
That's right.
And I'd be happy with that.
Interestingly, the signals are holding steady, they're not fluctuating. I'm just wondering whether there's like a gain happening there, or some sort of multipath thing happening with the little aerial wafting around, whereas the J-pole, although that's wafting about, maybe a bit more omnidirectional, maybe it's just a constant receive, don't know. So it's great. I've just left those guys. They're on a frequency. They're now having a QSO together, which is great. Yes, there you go. Tuned, and it works. Can't say any better than that. Comparing it with other things, well, that's another story in itself, isn't it? Kevin there is probably my most difficult local station to get and receive, but we managed it fine. The only, as I say, the interesting thing that did come about was the receive in the wind. Their signals were absolutely rock solid. Whereas with the little quarter wave, if I just go out here now, which they're plugged into now, as you can see, that's wafting around a fair bit. And I just wonder if the length of it and the way the ground plane works and everything, whether or not that actually makes a difference to its receive. Whereas this is a lot more sort of omnidirectional, isn't it? Maybe a slightly different angle of radiation or something to look into. So with my original bit of paper, the overall length for 145-500, according to that calculation, should be 148.5 centimetres overall. So that's from the bottom all the way up. So, you know, there we are. We're 1 mil out, 148.4. And the stub with the same calculation should be 49.5. Well, we're now 57. You know, we're eight more, aren't we? Also, the feed point should be 50 mil up from the bottom, which is where the 2 inches is there. 50 mil, 2 inches. We are at approximately, let's call that 13.5, 5 1/4, 2.5 times almost further up. So yeah, it's whether or not this part of the stub makes a difference to its radiation effect. Well, like I say, but we're definitely, as you saw on the VNA, we're definitely tuned in as much as we've got 50 ohms here. We've got a low SWR and low return loss. So the thing to do there is to have a signal strength meter and try and replicate the same numbers but with this all lower down. If you can do that, then great. But having said that, I couldn't get that before, which is why we ended up doing with this thing. I had envisaged putting one of these on the end here as well, but as it happens, it seems to work. Now, remember, I've got 2 screws here, 2 little bolts. Maybe there's some sort of, are they slightly magnetic now? And there's some sort of thing going on here. Who knows? This is a fiberglass tube. This is a plastic tube. Bit of wood in here. My air choke shouldn't make any difference at all to any of the readings. Well, there you go. That's your J-pole. Simple to build. Potentially tricky to tune for your situation. That's the only thing I would say, but a fun project nevertheless, especially it's made out of scraps lying about. Hope you enjoyed it and get some value out of this experience. Alright, see you again.